I never thought my life could turn upside down in such an absurd way. I always believed in love in everything it represents: commitment, respect, and companionship. Jack and I had known each other since school days, and I remember perfectly how we used to laugh at the silliest things, thinking that nothing and no one would ever separate us. For years, he was my anchor, my safe harbor, and I took pride in our relationship. But perhaps I was so blinded by this idea of perfection that I didn't see the signs that were right in front of me. The hints started slowly, almost like splinters that embed themselves without us realizing. A message he closed too quickly, an excuse for a trip he never mentioned before, the scent of a sweet and strange perfume that seemed to cling to his clothes. All of this began to add up like pieces of a disjointed and unsettling puzzle. But there was always an explanation, and despite feeling that pang of suspicion, I chose to trust. Maybe I was naive, or maybe I was afraid of what I might discover. The peak of my suspicion arose from an apparently silly detail, but one that affected me deeply. I found a spilled bottle of milk in Jack's car. It sounds ridiculous, I know, but Jack had always been obsessive about keeping his car clean. He would never let something like that happen. When I encountered that dry stain, and the strong smell of milk, a cold feeling washed over me. That bottle symbolized something bigger, something I still couldn't understand, but that would be the beginning of a devastating truth I was about to uncover. I found myself surrounded by clues, but they were just that, small fragments that, by themselves, proved nothing. However, my heart seemed to know what my mind was reluctant to accept. I began to observe Jack with a more watchful eye, trying to find something that could confirm or refute my suspicions. At the same time, I had to deal with my own internal struggle, the feeling that I was in some way betraying the trust we had always shared. Jack, my perfect man, was someone everyone in town adored. He had that friendly demeanor that easily won people over, especially women. I always knew this, but it never bothered me. It was never a problem until now. I started to notice behavioral nuances that had escaped me before. The way he discreetly checked his phone during dinner, or how he maintained a brief, almost mechanical smile when telling me about the clients he transported. He always described people in such detail, which I loved to hear. But suddenly, his enthusiasm for those stories seemed different. As if he were hiding something, omitting details that, to me, reflected a life I might not know as well as I thought. That week, I decided to confront him, not directly. I wasn't ready to hear the truth yet, but I needed to do something. So, taking advantage of a night when he went to bed early, I ventured into his phone. I know it's something I would never be proud of doing under any other circumstances, but desperation blinded me. When I opened his messages, I didn't find exactly what I feared, but something even more disturbing: a series of deleted conversations that devastated me. It was as if he already knew I would start questioning him and had tried to protect me somehow, or worse, protect himself. The feeling of betrayal began to consume my thoughts, transforming the love I had for him into a bitter mix of anger and anguish. Deep down, I just wanted an explanation, something that justified all this pain. That's when I realized if there was something to be discovered, I would need to dig deeper. And at that moment, there was nothing I wouldn't do to understand what was happening between us. The following days passed in a fog of suspicion and doubt. It was as if I were living a double life: on the outside, the calm and smiling woman everyone knew, and on the inside, a person consumed by the need to uncover the truth. But I knew I couldn't live in that agony forever. So, one afternoon when Jack told me he would need to work late, I decided to take definitive action. He had mentioned that he would be making a delivery in a nearby town, and that it might take a few hours. I felt that was a perfect moment to follow my instincts, even if it meant crossing the line of what was acceptable. I waited until he left, giving enough time to ensure he wouldn't return. I took the spare keys to his car and went to the garage. It was an impulse, I know, but something inside me screamed that I needed to do this. With each step, I felt my heart race, fearing what I might find. When I opened the car door, the first thing that caught my attention was a familiar scent, but there was something more: of a strange feeling that this space held secrets I was about to uncover. I riffled through the glove compartment, looked under the seats, and that's when I found something unexpected. A small bottle of women's perfume, something I would never wear. It was sweet and intense, completely different from my style. My hands trembled as I held the bottle, feeling a surge of anger take over me. But the worst was yet to come. At that moment, my phone vibrated, and when I looked at the screen, I saw a message from him, as if he had let his guard down. I arrived, wait for me in the same place. My heart raced as if it were about to burst from my chest. Who was he meeting, and why in the same place? All of this felt like a punch in the gut. I took a deep breath and, in a desperate decision, decided to go to the address where he had told me he would make the delivery. Did you know I risked being caught, but I needed to see with my own eyes? I drove there with cold hands and a pounding heart. I arrived at a quiet, deserted street where only a few cars were parked, and then I saw him. Jack, in the back seat of a car with a woman, young, beautiful, and clearly comfortable by his side. The image was overwhelming, like a cruel reality that I could no longer deny. My vision blurred and tears came uncontrollably. I thought about getting out and confronting them, but a part of me knew that would be a point of no return. Scenes from our life together flashed through my mind, and I realized that all of that, all the love and trust, had shattered into 1,000 pieces. I stayed there, frozen at the wheel, watching that scene for what felt like an eternity. Jack, my Jack, was with someone else. The pain was crushing, as if my heart had been ripped from my chest and trampled. Everything I had ever believed, all the moments we shared, now felt like a false set in a cruel theater. I was torn between the urge to get out of the car and confront them, and the need to process what I had just seen. When they got out of the car and walked together to a nearby cafe, something inside me broke. It wasn't just the fact that he was with another woman. It was the ease with which he behaved, as if this was something routine. He laughed, gestured with that familiarity I thought was ours alone. And she looked at him with shining eyes, as if she were the only person in the world that mattered. With each passing second, I felt a mix of anger and disbelief grow. After they entered the cafe, I decided I couldn't just walk away and move on as if nothing had happened. I needed to confront him, to make him know that I was aware of the betrayal. So, with my heart racing and anger consuming my body, I walked into the cafe. I saw Jack look up, and in an instant, his expression of surprise told me everything I needed to know. He was there, face to face with me, the woman by his side in complete shock. Before he could say a word, my anger exploded, and all I could do was pour out all the accumulated pain. So, this is it, Jack, all our love, all our history. Was it all a lie to you? He stammered something incoherent, trying to justify, but I didn't want to hear it. I felt that any word that came out of his mouth would only increase my outrage. The woman beside him looked equally bewildered, but she wasn't the one I cared about at that moment. It was him and the betrayal he represented. I left there without looking back, tears streaming down my face and a crushing sense of emptiness. It was over. I knew that nothing could fix the damage, and that our story, which I thought was forever, had ended in a brutal way. The love we had was destroyed, and my trust in him and in myself was irreparably broken. The days that followed were like walking through an endless storm. Every corner of the house seemed to remind me of him. Every detail was a stab of memories I couldn't erase. I felt fragile, vulnerable, as if the strong, confident Sarah had disappeared, leaving behind only a shadow. Still, there was something in me that refused to completely give in to the pain. Perhaps it was the same strength that made me confront Jack in that cafe, a survival instinct, a desire to find purpose again. Gradually, I realized I needed to rebuild myself, even if it was from the pieces he had shattered. It wouldn't be easy, but it was the only option. That's when I started to put my energy into something I had long wanted to do: return to school. I had always loved the idea of diving into literature, something that had once seemed like a distant dream incompatible with our routine. Now, without him, I had the time and freedom to pursue what I truly wanted. I enrolled in a night course in a neighboring town and began attending classes, where I found a new world that slowly helped me discover who I was beyond us. During this journey, I found support in people I had never expected. My closest friends encouraged me to go out, to rediscover simple pleasures like a walk outdoors or an afternoon in a bookstore. I also made new friends in the course, people who got to know me without the weight of that history, who helped me remember that life isn't just about a failed relationship. And little by little, I began to notice changes. The pain was still there, but it was no longer the center of my life. I was rediscovering my identity, rebuilding my confidence, and accepting that self-love, above all else, should be my priority. As difficult as it was, I realized that by surviving the storm, I was stronger and more prepared for whatever the future held. There were still scars, of course, but now they were marks of a battle I had won for myself. If this phase of growth aligns, I move on to prepare for the climax, where we will address Sarah's reunion with Jack. Months had passed since that fateful day, and although the wound still existed, I felt that I could finally breathe without the weight of that betrayal suffocating me. Life had moved on, and little by little, I was building a new routine, a new Sarah. I thought I would never see him again, but fate seemed to have other plans. One day, as I was leaving school after a class, my eyes fell upon a familiar figure in the parking lot. It was Jack. He was there, standing still, with the same expression I knew so well, but he looked visibly shaken. The last person I expected to see in that place, and at that moment, was him. I felt a wave of emotions, anger, sadness, even a hint of longing that I hated to admit. He saw me and came toward me, hesitantly. For a moment, I thought about ignoring him, simply moving on and pretending he was just part of a distant past. But curiosity and perhaps the need for closure made me stop and face him. Sarah, he started, his voice trembling. I need to talk to you. I remained silent, just staring at him, and he continued, explaining that he had made a mistake, that he had been weak, that all of it meant nothing compared to what we had lived. It was as if he were desperate to reverse the irreversible, trying to justify the unjustifiable. With each word, I felt a mix of contempt and compassion for him, but now I knew those words couldn't undo what he had broken. Jack, I interrupted, my voice firmer than I had imagined, you made your choice and I made mine. That Sarah you knew, she no longer exists. Today, I am someone who has learned to live without you. He fell silent, his expression defeated, perhaps finally understanding that our time had ended. I knew that at that moment, I was closing a chapter, leaving behind any remnants of guilt or regret I might have felt. Jack walked away, and I stood there, feeling a peace I hadn't experienced in a long time. That encounter with Jack was the last time I thought of him. I finally felt free to move on without carrying the weight of that failed love. But a few weeks later, while I was heading home after a night class, I received an unexpected call. It was a mutual friend, desperate, telling me that something horrible had happened. Sarah, Jack, he had an accident, she said, her voice choked. The world around me seemed to stop. I froze, trying to process what she had just said. Jack was returning from a party out of town when he lost control of the car and veered off the road. The accident was serious. Although he was rescued, the severity of his injuries left little hope. The next day, I hesitated, but I felt I needed to see him one last time. At the hospital, as I watched Jack unconscious in that bed, covered in tubes and machines, I realized the complexity of the feelings I still had for him. He had hurt me deeply, but in a way, he had also been an essential part of my life. I remained by his side in silence, reminiscing about the good times, the laughter, the dreams we shared, and the words I never got to say. No matter how much he had betrayed me, it was impossible to erase all the good we had lived. Then something unexpected happened. While I was there, I felt as if I was finally releasing any remnants of pain and anger that still lingered. As painful as it was, I internally said goodbye to Jack, forgiving him in silence. I knew that was a definitive closure for both of us. Hours later, Jack succumbed to his injuries and passed away. I felt a deep sadness mixed with a strange relief. Perhaps we were finally free from each other, each on our own path. I turned and left the hospital with the feeling that, despite everything, this experience had made me stronger, more aware of who I really was. After Jack's funeral, I felt that, for the first time in a long time, the past had truly been left behind. The tragedy of his departure brought complex feelings, longing, sadness, but also a sense of closure. What once felt like an immense weight transformed into a kind of unexpected freedom. It was as if I had lived two lives, one alongside Jack and another that only began when he was gone. Over time, I learned to remember only the good memories and let forgiveness take the place of hurt. It wasn't something I did for him, but for myself. I realized that true healing wasn't just about overcoming betrayal, but understanding that each experience, no matter how painful, had something to teach. Jack, in a way, was an important chapter in my journey of self-discovery and resilience. In the following months, I delved even deeper into my studies, my work, and everything that made me feel alive and fulfilled. The friends who supported me became my chosen family, and slowly, I began to rediscover the joy of living without fear of trusting again. Looking back now doesn't hurt anymore. On the contrary, I feel that my story with Jack, with all its joys and sorrows, taught me to value the woman I became. A woman who learned to face pain, confront her fears, and most importantly, move forward with her head held high. Life, after all, is made of beginnings and endings, and with the end of this chapter, I was finally ready to start a new story.